When Freddie Mercury walked into Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, on November 17, 1990, and told his bandmates, "I'm done," Brian May felt his heart drop. What none of them knew was that those two words would lead to one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in music history. What happened in the next 18 months would leave the world forever changed. The air in Mountain Studios that cold November morning was thick with tension you could almost taste. Outside, Lake Geneva stretched grey and endless under heavy clouds, the Swiss Alps barely visible through the morning mist. Inside Studio 2, the room where Queen had crafted some of their most iconic albums, the heating system hummed softly, but it couldn't touch the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Roger Taylor sat behind his drum kit, sticks in hand, frozen mid-motion. He'd been about to count off for a take of "The Show Must Go On," but the words died in his throat. John Deacon's bass hung silent against his chest, his fingers still on the fretboard from the opening notes they'd been rehearsing. Brian May's guitar pick slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor, the sound echoing through the cavernous recording space like a gunshot in a cathedral. Freddie stood in the doorway, backlit by the grey Swiss morning light filtering through the tall studio windows. His frame was noticeably thinner than it had been just 6 months earlier, when they'd started preliminary work on what would become the Innuendo album. He wore his usual black jeans and white tank top, the unofficial uniform of a working musician, but the clothes hung differently now. Looser. The tank top that used to cling to his muscular shoulders now draped more softly. His eyes, those fierce dark eyes that had commanded stadiums of 70,000 screaming fans, that had held audiences across 5 continents completely mesmerized, looked tired. Not just sleepy tired, but weary in a way that went bone deep. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. "I'm done," Freddie repeated, his voice steady, but quieter than usual. "Done pretending I'm okay, done lying to you, done lying to myself." Roger stood up so fast his stool tipped backward and crashed to the floor. "Freddie, mate, we can take a break. We can postpone the album. Just tell us what you need." Freddie walked into the room with that distinctive stride of his, still graceful despite everything. He sat down on the leather couch near the mixing board, the same couch where they'd written parts of Bohemian Rhapsody 15 years earlier. He looked at each of them one by one. Brian noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "I'm not stopping," Freddie said. "That's not what I mean." John finally found his voice. "Then what are you saying?" What none of them knew in that moment was that Freddie had been awake since 3:00 a.m., sitting in his bedroom at his home just 10 minutes away, watching the sun rise over Lake Geneva. He'd made a decision that would define not just his final months, but his entire legacy. Freddie took a breath. "I'm done hiding. I'm done with small sessions and careful planning and pretending we have all the time in the world. I know what's happening to me. You know what's happening to me. The whole bloody world is going to know soon enough." He paused, his voice catching for just a second before he steadied it. "I want to record. I want to record everything. Every song you've written, every idea we've had, everything we haven't finished. I want to give you as much as I possibly can while I still can." The weight of those words settled over the room like snow. Brian May would later tell a journalist that he'd never heard such quiet in that studio. You could hear the hum of the equipment, the distant sound of cars on the street outside, the almost imperceptible buzz of the fluorescent lights. No one moved. No one seemed to breathe. "How long?" Roger asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doctors said months, maybe a year if I'm lucky." Freddie's jaw tightened. "But I'm not going to spend whatever time I have left lying in a bed feeling sorry for myself. I'm going to do what I've always done. I'm going to perform. Maybe not on stage anymore, but here in this room with you." John Deacon, always the quiet one, was the first to speak what they were all thinking. "Freddie, recording is exhausting. The hours, the takes, the concentration. If you're not well—" "That's exactly why we need to do this now," Freddie interrupted, leaning forward. "Don't you see? I can't do concerts anymore. I can't give them that. But I can give them this. I can give them music, songs that will last long after I'm gone." He stood up, some of that old fire returning to his eyes. "I want to work. I need to work. It's the only thing that makes sense to me anymore." Brian picked up his guitar from where it leaned against the wall. His fingers found the strings without thinking, a soft progression of chords that had no name yet. "Then we work," he said simply. The decision Freddie made that November morning was unprecedented. Most artists in his condition would have retreated, would have spent their remaining time in privacy and comfort. But Freddie Mercury wasn't most artists. He was a performer to his core, and if he couldn't perform on stage, he would perform in the studio. He would record until his voice gave out, until his body refused to cooperate, until the very last moment possible. What happened next was extraordinary. They began working the very next day. Freddie showed up at 10:00 a.m. sharp, earlier than he'd arrived for a session in years. Usually, Freddie was a night owl, preferring to start recording after lunch and work into the evening. But something had shifted. He arrived in Jim's silver Mercedes, moving carefully but purposefully from the car to the studio entrance. He carried that same notebook filled with lyrics, some finished, some just fragments, some written in the middle of sleepless nights when medication and worry made rest impossible. Brian, Roger, and John had been writing too, more prolifically than they had in years, but they'd held back the material. Uncertain if Freddie would have the strength to record them, unsure if it was cruel to even ask. Now they brought everything forward. Scraps of melodies that Brian had hummed into a tape recorder at 2:00 a.m., drum patterns Roger had been developing, chord progressions John had worked out on acoustic guitar in his home studio, all of it laid at Freddie's feet like offerings. The recording sessions were unlike anything they'd experienced in their 20 years together. There was an intensity, a sense of purpose that transcended their usual professional approach. They'd always been serious about their craft, but this was different. Every moment felt precious. Every take felt like it might be the last. And yet, remarkably, there was also joy. Freddie's voice, that legendary 4-octave instrument that had defined a generation, that had soared over Bohemian Rhapsody and growled through We Will Rock You, was still powerful but required careful management now. Some days were better than others. On good days, he could nail a vocal take in 1 or 2 runs, his voice finding those impossible high notes with the same crystalline clarity that had always been his trademark. On difficult days, they would record line by line, phrase by phrase, Freddie summoning reserves of strength that seemed impossible given his condition. David Richards, their longtime engineer and producer, learned to read Freddie's energy levels with uncanny precision. He could tell within 5 minutes of Freddie arriving whether it would be a full session day or whether they'd need to work in shorter bursts. He kept the studio temperature exactly at 72 degrees, kept Freddie's preferred brand of Evian water stocked, made sure the lighting wasn't too harsh for eyes that had become sensitive to brightness. The Show Must Go On was written in January 1991. Brian May composed the music, but he had doubts about whether Freddie could handle the vocal demands. The song required sustained power, dramatic crescendos, the kind of singing that would challenge even a healthy vocalist. He approached Freddie cautiously one afternoon. "Fred, I've got this track, but I don't know if you can—" "I'll fucking do it, darling." Freddie cut him off, a flash of his old defiant humor breaking through. "Give me a vodka and watch me." Brian did. He poured Freddie a shot of vodka. Freddie drank it, walked to the microphone, and proceeded to deliver one of the most powerful vocal performances of his entire career, in one take. The man who could barely climb stairs without getting winded sang with a force and passion that seemed to defy medical reality. When he finished, there were tears streaming down Brian's face. Roger had his head in his hands. Even their usually stoic engineer, David Richards, had to step away from the mixing board for a moment. Freddie took off the headphones and smiled. That brilliant smile that could light up any room. Was that enough, then? Between November 1990 and May 1991, Freddie recorded over 15 tracks. Some were finished songs that would appear on albums. Some were just his vocals laid over musical tracks, gifts for his bandmates to complete after he was gone. He recorded even when he had to sit down between takes. He recorded when his vision was blurry from medication. He recorded when the pain was so intense that they had to take breaks every 20 minutes. Jim Hutton, Freddie's partner, would drive him to the studio each morning and wait in the adjacent room, ready to help if needed. Some days Freddie would walk out after 3 hours, exhausted but satisfied. Other days he'd push for 6, 7 hours, refusing to stop despite everyone's concerns. "You can't stop me," he told them repeatedly. "This is all I have left to give. Let me give it." In late April 1991, they recorded Mother Love, a song Freddie had written about his mother and the complicated relationship with his past. It required delicate, emotional vocals. Freddie recorded most of it in a single session, but the final verse remained unfinished. He was simply too weak that day. "We'll get it next session," he said, his voice hoarse. But there was no next session for that song. Freddie's health deteriorated rapidly after that. The final verse of Mother Love would eventually be sung by Brian May, a poignant tribute to the friend they knew they were losing. What Freddie's bandmates didn't fully understand until later was the gift he was giving them. He wasn't just recording music, he was creating a legacy, yes, but more than that, he was giving his friends a way to process their grief. He was giving them purpose during the most painful time of their lives. Every session, every take, every laugh between recordings was a moment of normalcy in an increasingly dark time. He was letting them keep being a band, keep doing what they loved together, for as long as possible. On May 24, 1991, Freddie recorded his final vocal session. The song was a cover, just something fun, something that reminded him of easier times. When he finished, he hugged each of his bandmates. It wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches. Just 4 men who had spent 20 years making music together, standing in a studio, knowing without saying it that this was the end of something extraordinary. Freddie left the studio that evening as the sun was setting over the Swiss mountains. Brian watched him walk to Jim's car, watched him move carefully, watched him pause for just a moment to look back at the building where they'd created so much magic. Then he got in the car and was gone. Here's the part that no one expected. Freddie lived for another 18 months after that final recording session. 18 months that the doctors said was impossible. 18 months that defied every medical prediction they'd been given. The specialist at the clinic in Lausanne had given him 6 months, maybe 9 if he was extraordinarily fortunate. They'd seen his test results. They knew the progression of his condition. By all medical logic, May 1991 should have been his final month. But Freddie Mercury had never been particularly interested in following anyone's expectations, medical or otherwise. And while he spent those months away from the studio, away from the public eye, returning to his home in London's Kensington district, surrounding himself with his cats and his art collection and the people he loved, the music he'd recorded continued to work its own kind of magic. The album Innuendo, released in February 1991, shot to #1 in the UK within days. It debuted at #1, only the second time Queen had achieved that feat. In Germany, it went platinum in 3 weeks. In France, it topped the charts for 7 consecutive weeks. Music critics wrote glowing reviews, calling it a return to form, praising the complexity of the title track and the raw emotion in the ballads. What the critics didn't know was that they were hearing a man who knew these might be his final recordings. Every note carried that weight. Every lyric had been carefully chosen. Freddie had poured everything into this album, and it showed in ways that transcended technical perfection. The Show Must Go On, released as a single in October 1991, became an anthem. MTV played the video constantly, using shadows and silhouettes that preserved Freddie's privacy while honoring his artistry. Radio stations put it on heavy rotation. Everyone knew, the whole world knew. But Freddie had done it on his own terms. He hadn't given interviews about his illness. He'd simply created art that spoke for itself, that transcended personal circumstance, that connected with something universal in human experience. When Freddie died on November 24, 1991, the world mourned. But Queen had something most bands never get, a vault of unreleased material. Songs Freddie had recorded during those intense months in late 1990 and early 1991, his final gift. Made in Heaven, the album assembled from those final sessions, was released in November 1995, 4 years after Freddie's death. It went to #1 in the UK. Songs like Too Much Love Will Kill You and You Don't Fool Me became hits years after they were recorded. Freddie's voice, preserved in digital perfection, continued to reach new audiences, continued to move hearts, continued to perform even though the man himself was gone. Brian May keeps a photo in his home studio. It's from that final recording session in May 1991. Freddie is sitting on the leather couch, headphones around his neck, laughing at something John just said. He looks thin, yes. Tired, yes. But in that moment, captured forever, he looks happy. He looks like someone doing exactly what they were meant to do. In interviews over the years, all three surviving members of Queen have talked about those final recording sessions with a mixture of pain and gratitude. Roger Taylor said it best in a 2018 interview. He gave us a gift, not just the music, though God knows that was gift enough. He gave us purpose when we needed it most. He let us still be a band, still be his friends, still do what we loved together. That last year and a half, even though it was heartbreaking, even though we knew how it would end, those sessions were some of the most meaningful of our entire career. The Mercury Phoenix Trust, established in Freddie's memory in April 1992, just 5 months after his death, has raised over $20 million for HIV/AIDS causes worldwide. But the numbers only tell part of the story. It's funded groundbreaking research into antiretroviral treatments at universities in London, New York, and São Paulo. It supported mobile testing clinics in rural South Africa that have screened over 50,000 people. It's provided medication to patients in India who couldn't otherwise afford treatment. It's funded education programs in schools across Eastern Europe, breaking down stigma and spreading accurate information about prevention and treatment. Every album sale, every streaming royalty from those final songs Freddie recorded, every time someone discovers "The Show Must Go On" or "These Are the Days of Our Lives" on Spotify or Apple Music, a portion goes to the trust. Freddie continues to save lives through his music, continues to make a difference, continues to perform his final greatest show, the fight against the disease that took him. There's a plaque at Mountain Studios in Montreux now, installed in 1996 with a small ceremony attended by the remaining members of Queen and several hundred fans. It's simple, just brass letters on polished wood. Freddie Mercury recorded here 1978-1991. The show went on. Fans leave flowers there year-round. Notes written in dozens of languages, photographs of Freddie in his prime and of fans whose lives he changed, drawings of the band, lyrics written in careful handwriting on scraps of paper. The studio has become a pilgrimage site for people who never met Freddie, but who were moved by his music, by his courage, by his refusal to go quietly into the night. In 2013, the studio opened a small museum space displaying equipment from those final sessions. The microphone Freddie used, the leather couch where he rested, photographs that Brian May finally felt ready to share. Over 30,000 people visit yearly from every corner of the globe to stand where Freddie created his final gift. That moment in November 1990 when Freddie said, "I'm done," wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of one of the most productive and meaningful periods of creative work in rock history. He transformed what could have been months of decline into a final act of defiant artistry. He showed the world that life isn't measured in years or health, but in what you create, what you give, and how you face your final chapter. The truth behind "I'm done" wasn't that Freddie was giving up. It was that he was just getting started on the most important work of his life. Work that would echo through decades, work that would save lives through the charity founded in his name. Work that would remind millions of people that the show must, always must, go on. If this powerful story of Freddie's courage and resilience moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of facing adversity with grace and purpose. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone transformed their darkest time into something beautiful? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the heart behind music's greatest legends.